Welcome back to the Emerge Stronger podcast. I am here with my co-host, Melody Oseguera. Hello, Melody.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm great. I'm looking forward to this next topic that we're talking about, which is fear of abandonment. And I
Mhm.
feel like with our line of business, I feel like I say that a lot, but with our line of business,
Mhm.
we see a lot of this in our clients. And so I think
Mhm.
it's an important topic to talk about. So I'm going to kick it off with just kind of explaining to the audience, well, what is fear of abandonment? What does that even mean? And as I was doing some research regarding this topic, I found a couple different things. And so on dictionary.com, the true meaning of abandonment is the action or fact of abandoning or being abandoned. And so when somebody has a feeling of utter abandonment and loneliness. And so that's what we're talking about today. We're going to kind of just walk through the signs of fear of abandonment, how to, I guess, kind of like the root of where it comes from. I think you'll also talk about maybe some attachment style type things of recognizing, certain behavioral styles of people that have this fear of abandonment or attachment styles. And so I found an article by a writer by the name of Lisa Fritcher. And here are some signs of fear of abandonment. People that attach quickly, that are unavailable to partners or relationships, even to unavailable partners or relationships. So they're attaching very, very fast.
Mhm.
They fail to commit fully. So have had very long-term relationships, but they fail to fully commit. They move on quickly just to ensure that you don't get too attached. A lot of the people that have fear of abandonment, they aim to please and engage in people-pleasing behaviors. They have difficulty experiencing emotional intimacy. Fear of abandonment also can come from feeling insecure and unworthy of love. These people are often jealous of everyone that they meet. They experience intense feelings of separation anxiety. They are hypersensitive to criticism. They contain repressed anger and control issues. And then lastly, they can engage in self-blame and criticism frequently. And so some of these causes of fear and abandonment can stem from childhood.
Mhm.
And some of those can be the very act of being abandoned as a child. Physical and emotional abuse, complete neglect. Sometimes it's the death of a loved one, so losing a parent, losing a sibling, and then emotional distance from a caregiver or a parent. And so I just wanted to lay that foundation as we dive into the conversation, because I think it's important just to understand kind of, what is fear of abandonment? What are some of the signs of fear of abandonment? And yeah, so I'll
Okay.
let you take it from here.
Okay. So one of what we know about in the social sciences that everybody has three major fears when they're born. The first one is the fear of loud noises. The second one is the fear of falling, and the third one is the fear of abandonment. Because when you look at it from an infant point of view, is our whole survival depends on somebody being there for us. We can't feed ourselves. We can't change our diaper. We can't, none of that stuff. And we learn what love is really about too. We all know that there's a thing called failure to thrive. So if a child does not get the love and affection from a caregiver, then they can actually die from not having that connection. So we are hardwired for connection. And so even from infancy, we have this fear of abandonment. And so how does a child let their caregiver know that something's wrong? They cry, "Hey, help me," right? Because
Mhm.
we need that connection. And so oftentimes, we think it triggers things from the past. So kind of going back to what you said, it like the wounds from the past get reopened. But ultimately, we are hardwired to be connected to other people. And when that connection breaks or fails, like we do go through this grief process. I was listening to a podcast recently and it talked about this individual, and I don't even remember his name. So you'd have to Google it. But he like completely went off the grid, and kind of cut off his relationships with his family and everything like that, and he went to live in the mountains. And they actually found him dead, and he was documenting his journey and all that. And one of the last entries he made was, realizing that family connection, love, is actually way more important than what I thought it was, right? And so we are hardwired for connection. And when we experience somebody leaving our life, and I even think about the child like that loses a parent, even though we have an understanding that, the parent may have died because of some disease or a car wreck or whatever, the child still experiences that as abandonment, because the person that was there, to give them care, the care and the love and the attention, and, just meeting their everyday needs, is no longer there. The child still experiences it as abandonment, even though they have an understanding. It's like their parent chose this, right? And I could see how it would even make it harder for those that experience where their family does completely reject them and walk away. That's something that my husband experienced as a child. His dad wasn't there because there were issues between the mom and the dad, right? But then the mom walked away too. Her life was kind of messed up and all that kind of stuff. So she abandoned him too. So he went to his grandmother, which was good, and she was there for him, and he loves her deeply, and all those types of things. But he still experienced that abandonment so much, to the point where he's like, I don't need people, because people leave you anyway. Like, don't trust a person to stay there, because everybody's going to leave anyway. And so it creates if we push people away, it creates this, I'm alone again. It just reinforces that feeling of abandonment. And there are people that say, oh, I don't need connection, but we actually do need it. We need it to thrive. We need it to grow. We need to develop, and just to feel safe, because that's one of the things that we need, is to feel safe in our environment, safe with people that we love. So we have to have that sense of belonging to something. And so if we don't have that, again, it another thing it can do, it reopens old wounds. It reminds us of the past, which we just kind of talked about. The other thing it starts kind of contributing or stirring up is, I'm not enough. I'm not lovable, and I'm inadequate, and everybody leaves me. And so it either will create a lot of anxiety, or it'll create a lot of avoidance, and sometimes ping-ponging back and forth between the two. So there are some people that will sometimes feel anxious about it, and sometimes they'll feel avoidant about it. And so it kind of creates chaos in our own lives, because we don't feel like we're good enough. And so that's why people become jealous, right?
Mhm, mhm.
I want what they have, because they seem to be accepted by everybody. And I have discovered in my 50 years of life that I do, and so does everybody else, a lot of assuming things that are not true. Right?
Yes.
And so we just assume that, we're not lovable, or we assume that that person's better than us. We assume that that person doesn't struggle. And of course, social media, everybody puts the perfect face on for social media and all that kind of thing. And I'm not against social media at all, but you have to look like, everybody is still a real person. They're still going to have struggles. It's not always what it looks like. Right.
Mhm, mhm.
But we will get caught up in, oh, look at that person's life and all that, and we will covet what they have, when in reality, you don't know the demons that person is facing on the back end. So I know that I know that we all do that. We have all looked at, said, it seems like that person's life is all together or whatever, but we have to stop assuming, because assumption can be the death of us. Like, it could really be, we could get so caught up in comparing ourselves to the Joneses, right?
Yeah,
And completely lose focus and control over our own lives. The other
yeah.
thing that the fear of rejection does, it actually does affect the nervous system. And so the area that we feel, okay, rejection triggers the pain response. So whatever we have, and our brain does not know the difference between physical pain and emotional pain. It just knows pain. And so when we're feeling rejection, it will trigger that pain response. And people that have struggled with the fear of rejection or abandonment. So I would say the fear of rejection is the secondary, the primary is the fear of abandonment. So I'm going to be using those terms interchangeably, but it creates sometimes a sense of panic, right?
Mm.
And so a lot of times when, if a person breaks up with an anxious person, they'll like go through high pursuit and try to get that person back, and sometimes do really, I don't want to say, well, I'll just say crazy things, crazy
Mhm.
things to try to get that person back. Right. And so they'll go to these extremes to try to win that love back, when all it does is actually create the environment where that person is like, I don't want to have anything to do with you. You're way too clingy. It can also generate the fight, flight, or freeze response, which sometimes people will add fawn in there too. So they'll kind of start people pleasing whenever the nervous system is activated because of the pain that they're experiencing. Okay. And sometimes it can trigger this dependency on other people. And you'll sometimes see where people will go from relationship to relationship to relationship without any gap in between. It's because they have that fear that I can't be alone. Right. And all of the things that we're talking about, I mean, it falls under attachment theory. That's where it
Mhm.
falls under. And so sometimes they will be overly dependent and even lose their identity in a relationship and not even know who they are, because it's like, I'm inadequate. I'm not good enough. And so I need to, kind of enmesh myself with this other person and to be dependent because they make me feel like I'm a better person. Right.
Mhm.
And it
Mhm.
becomes very unhealthy, this unhealthy reliance on the other person to fulfill your emotional needs. And what we know is that is not healthy at all. It's not healthy for the relationship. It's not healthy for the person that's experiencing the dependency, but it's also not healthy for the person that is being depended on. It creates this unhealthy dynamic, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times it can make us feel like we've lost control of our lives, that we're completely unlovable, that we're alone. And it can send people into a depression. And I'm not saying all those things for people to be like, oh, yeah, there's no hope. There actually is hope. There's steps that you have to take in order to come out of that. But the fear of abandonment is a real thing, or the fear of rejection is a real thing. And sometimes we don't understand our emotions or anything, what we're feeling. But if we can find the core of where that came in and start healing that wound, then it changes the dynamic of your life, but it also begins to change the dynamic of your relationships. And so I'm here to say, yeah, all that stuff is scary, all that stuff is real, but you can overcome it.
Yeah. So good. So it made me think of a couple different clients, and one in particular that has kind of this, I guess, anxious attachment style. But I don't think that they understand or that they can pinpoint why they have this fear of abandonment or fear of rejection.
Mhm,
And so it causes obviously problems in the relationship because they're so insecure and feeling as though my spouse doesn't love me, my spouse, I'm not worthy, my spouse is going to leave me, but not recognizing that that's stemming from my parents divorced when I was a young child.
mhm, mhm.
My father abandoned me.
Right.
Another one that comes to mind is having this childhood wound in in the marriage, constantly people pleasing, feeling the need to make sure that their spouse sees them, hears them, loves them, but the spouse doesn't meet their need the way that they feel that that need needs to be met. Therefore, they go and seek that emotional attachment to
Right.
somebody else, therefore
Mhm,
causes the affair. And
right.
so, like you were saying, that's not healthy either because now they're dependent on somebody else to fill that void,
Mhm,
where it goes back to the secure. You need to
mhm.
find it within yourself to feel that secure attachment or to work towards that secure attachment.
Right. And so a lot of times we do a lot of crazy things in relationships, and I wish that we would be able to teach relationship skills in school. Very beneficial for everybody, but that doesn't happen. So, eh, people will do weird things. It's like some attachment styles will be like, well, everybody needs to meet their own needs, and you can't have expectations on anybody to help meet your needs. And although you need to be okay with yourself, like you need to be okay being single, right? You need to love yourself enough and feel confident that you don't necessarily need anybody. But at the end of the day, we are hardwired for relationships. Like we do
Yeah.
need healthy relationships in our life. So you have, and those are more of the avoidant people. Oh, just take care of your own needs. Don't rely on anybody else. I shouldn't have to be responsible for your emotional well-being. And it creates that independent mindset in a relationship. But if you're with another person and you're like completely independent and not leaning on each other, that's going to create some anxiety or maybe feelings of abandonment in the relationship. And then you have the other extreme of a person that is so anxious that they want the attention of their partner so much and they're so dependent on it that they don't know who they are, and
Mhm.
they think that their spouse or their parent or their lover or whatever is fully responsible for their emotions, right? And they're not responsible for their emotions at all, right?
Right.
And then you have the other person that kind of ping pongs between the two, right? Back and forth. That's going to be like the fearful avoidant attachment style. And it's like they want a person to meet their needs, but they don't want to have to tell the person how to meet them. An anxious person will kind of also do that. Well, they just need to know, they need to be in tune. And like you set yourself up for failure. You should be able to say, hey, here are the core things that I need, my expectations in a relationship.
Mhm.
Right. And
Mhm.
so here they are. But for whatever reason, we're afraid to do that. And I say we, as in I've done that before as well, like not setting the expectations in the relationship. But when you go out to practice in archery, you have to actually have a target to hit. You can't just, hit random things. Like, how do you know that you're developing your skill? You have to have a target. And so when we outline our expectations of people that we're in relationship with, we we have to tell them what the targets are, like, specifically, and those are going to be different for every person. So the things that I need in a relationship may not be the thing you need in a relationship, right? We're different people. We do this for jobs. Like, when we go and we apply for a job, we look at the job description. That's the target that they want us to hit, and then we tell them, okay, in order for me to hit this target, I need this amount of money, right, for me to come here every day and work hard to meet these targets. But we don't do that in relationships. And I would say there has to be like 5 to 7 things of like core things that we need, expectations that we need to outline in a relationship. And then there are other things that we want, but it's not a deal breaker, right?
Yeah.
And we can never look at it in terms of, okay, 80%. eh, I'm sorry, 100, but we can never look at it in terms of 100%. Like, we can expect our loved ones to hit the target 70 to 80% of the time. And that's pretty good. I mean, that it helps you graduate school, if 70%, you still graduate like the person that made a 95, right? And you may not get the same benefits like in terms of scholarships, but you still pass the course, you still move forward, right? And so we have to have a realistic expectation, but we won't even, a person that's kind of fearful avoidant is not even good about outlining what that target is. And really, none of the insecure attachment styles are good at outlining that target. We do a whole lot of assumption, and when our spouses or our loved ones don't hit that target, we assume that they don't love us.
Mhm.
But really, in reality, that's not true, right? It is, we haven't outlined the target. We get so caught up in the infatuation of a relationship and, oh, happily ever after, and this Disney fairy tale and all that. And that's just not what relationships are.
Yeah.
There's a reason why you enter into contracts with people, and you outline what the expectations are and you move forward. And not that I'm saying that you have to have this legal document to go into a relationship, a romantic relationship or whatever, but we do need to be willing to outline that and then communicate if our loved one is not hitting the target. Like, hey, look, I like this, but this would be better, right? You don't
Mhm.
want to do it in a critical way, like you're missing the target, because that's not going to help anything. But that will create the environment where at least a person knows what they need to do to help hit that target. It's okay to have one. It's okay to have expectations in a relationship. And so we need to be sure that we're outlining those things.
And make sure that those are spoken expectations, because an unspoken expectation only leads to resentment and disappointment. And you are the one that it's affected. And so if I
Yeah.
have these expectations of Melody as my friend, but I never tell you, or as my business partner, I never tell you what those are, and then I
Mhm.
continue to get irritated with you because you didn't meet those expectations, well, I'm the one at fault because I never communicated those to you.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely right. So let's talk a little bit about how we break the cycle that. And, at It's Not Over, we're focused on attachment because we believe that every relationship issue is rooted and grounded in attachment, even when it comes to business.
Mhm.
That's an issue too. When, as a business partner, those wounds can still be triggered, by someone else, and so we have to learn to talk those things out and express those things, right? And I mean, I've been in that where it's like, hey, this is how this makes me feel, or if this doesn't happen, this is how it makes me feel, and being open and honest and transparent about that. And it's not an easy conversation all the time, right? But it's something that you have to deal with. So I would say the very first thing is you do want to try to identify what your attachment style is. Every insecure attachment style, there's some type of root in abandonment. I'm going to be abandoned because of the experiences that we've had in the past. And just because somebody else abandoned us in our life, it doesn't mean that every person is going to do that. And here's the other thing, the abandonment that we have experienced may not be about us at all. So, like in the scenario with me and my husband, in the 6 years that we were separated, we are the breakdown of our relationship. Yes, I contributed to that, but overall, he wasn't necessarily abandoning me. It was about what he was going through. Now, the byproduct of it is that I felt abandoned or that he left, right? But his primary goal, like, he didn't wake up in the morning and say, "Hey, I'm going to abandon my wife." That's not what was going on. In fact, he was hurting. No doubt our relationship kind of triggered some of the old wounds from the past. And he's like, "I need to not hurt anymore, so let me do these things so I don't hurt." So a lot of times when a person has experienced abandonment, it's not necessarily a personal rejection towards you, although sometimes that it is with the case. But I'm finding, as I coach my clients, more times than not, it's not a specific direct rejection of that person. There's other circumstances that are contributing to a person's actions. And typically it's because they're not ready to deal with their own pain. So I remember at one point in time, I think my daughter was probably 6 or 7, and she told me, "Mom, when we're hurting, it's like we're bleeding, and then we tend to bleed on other people," which I thought, "Oh, she's a genius."
Wow.
Anyway, I don't know if she heard that somewhere or whatever, but I was like, "Oh yeah, it's true." So like when we're hurting, it's a form of bleeding, and then that will bleed on other things. So that goes back to hurt people,
Mhm.
and it's not necessarily their intention to do so, but it is something that happens. And so we have to learn how to reframe how we see the rejection and take ourselves out of that emotional, that nervous system response that we have. And this is why coaching is very beneficial for that, because it helps us really reframe that. And so many times with people, I'm like, you have to look at it like that person's in pain. Look, they have this and this and this and this and this that's contributed to the pain that they're experiencing in life. And then y'all had your own stuff that contributed to that. And their nervous system is like fight, flight, or freeze. Like that's what happens, or fawn. And so they're having a response and they don't like that pain. It's painful. So they're medicating that pain in whatever way, whether it be drugs, alcohol, sex, porn, whatever. Right. And that's hurting you, but they're not trying to do it directly to you. Now, there are some cases where that is the truth, but more times than not, I mean, this as a coach, that it's more about what that person individually, like, it was more about what David was experiencing with his own pain, and less about me. but
Mhm.
I took it so personally
Yeah.
because it affected me. It caused me all kinds of pain,
Yeah.
but it wasn't necessarily this complete rejection of me, although it triggered that wound big time. And I went through, I'm not good enough. I'm not adequate. Why does this keep happening to me? Because it happened in my first marriage too, where he cheated on me. And so it was like, why does this keep happening to me? And it must be something that I'm doing wrong. Right. And yes, I was doing things wrong, but it did not warrant an affair.
Sure.
You know, but I had to reframe how I saw that and not take it so personally. We're so sensitive these days, and it's important to be in tune, but don't be the victim. Right.
Yes.
There's extremes in that. So I would say identifying your attachment wound is the very first thing that you do. And then you work towards feelings of self-worth. Or positive self-worth, which is you're working on yourself. You're identifying the things that you got to be honest with yourself. I think of one particular client, I told her, you are controlling. And she didn't want to accept it. Like she did not want to see it. But yeah, but he did this, he did that. Yeah, but you're controlling. And you can't change what he's done. You can't make him, wise up or anything like that, but you can stop the control. Like you can
And
stop.
her control is coming from something of her past. There's a reason why she does what she does. And
Yeah.
so sometimes it's hard for people to see that or to even stop and say, okay, why am I controlling? Where is this coming from?
Hmm. Hmm.
One thing that I want to share really quick, because I think we see a lot of this, and I can even pinpoint it in my own relationship. We went years upon years with him being avoidant and me being anxious.
Hmm.
And he was an avoidant for a certain reason. I was anxious for a certain reason. And we lived in this cycle for years.
Hmm.
4 years until we were both at a point to work on ourselves and become secure within ourselves. So now we are both in a secure attachment. Sure, my anxiousness comes out, his avoidance comes out every now and then, but for
Hmm.
the most part, we live insecure. But I just wanted to point that out because I think a lot of people sit here and one person could be secure and the other spouse could be, one of the other attachment styles, or you both can be in the insecurity
Hmm.
of attachment styles. So I think that that's important for people to recognize that. And a lot of clients that I talk to, especially the couples, they live in this vicious cycle over and over and over again.
One of the things that you just said there is the truth. You said that we lived in that cycle for years. And then you said, and occasionally now I might be anxious and he might be avoidant. And that's the thing. You're always going to have a little bit of the old pattern present. But what makes the difference between staying in the chaos for years and then living in a thriving relationship is that you understand that about yourself first, that you have a
Mhm.
tendency to be anxious. And so sometimes what you're feeling is just you and not him.
Yeah.
Right. And then Jason has a tendency to be avoidant. And so sometimes his avoidance has really nothing to do with you and more about him. And so you learn to work through that. It's the same thing for me. Not too long ago, me and David had this exchange, and literally I was seeing the fear, because I'm fearful avoidant, the fearful side coming out in this conversation. It was a minor conversation, it wasn't even anything important, right? And I was like, wait, what am I doing? Like, this does not need to be solved. Like, it was a text conversation, which is the worst way to have any type of serious conversation. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, just stop. Like, I mean, I am amping this up, and the more I amp it up, I know, because of history, he's going to become more avoidant. And the more avoidant he comes, the more I'm going to amp up. So why not just stop this right now? And
Yeah.
number one, have the conversation in person. And so when he did get home and we had the conversation, it was fine. But I had to recognize I'm responding in an anxious way. And I know this is gonna make him become more avoidant. And so I need to stop because I trigger him and he definitely triggers me. Right.
Mhm.
And I know he's done the same thing for me. There's been times where he engaged so that I would stop being anxious. Right. And so I'm like, I'm stopping because I know my over engagement is going to cause avoidance. So you work through that and it becomes, you know your tendencies, and you can overcome that. Not that they're not ever going to be there again. And I feel like when you have an insecure attachment style, and a big part of the population does, that it's a lifelong journey to healing. And you get better and better and better and better. And I'm not saying that you can't ever get to a place of security. I think that you can, but I think it's all in what are the people that are in that, really, how are they operating in that relationship, right? Like, is my spouse behaving in a secure way? Am I behaving in a secure way? That's gonna create the environment where we are secure together. But we always can have those tendencies, right? Because those habits are hard to break. And I make myself like reframe things all the time. Okay, I'm seeing it this way. I have a tendency to see it this way because I'm fearful, avoid it. And so let me define the lie and then come back and fight that lie with truth. Right? What is the truth? And that was one of the things that, when me and my husband were reconciling, it was, you get these triggers, right? You have these triggers that kind of like make you afraid, and then you could go down the rabbit hole, which is not good. But then what I would do is, okay, where is the evidence that this isn't true? Well, he's super engaged in our relationship. He wants to spend time with me. We're having deep conversations. He's talking about future things with me, right? That I was feeling like, when I looked at his attempt to create oneness with us, right? I was like, oh, so this is just a fleeting thing. I'm not saying that you ignore any long-term signs, but I'm going to look for the evidence. And if the evidence is there that he is engaged, then maybe this is just a moment. And let's see how I feel about it in a couple of days. Right.
Yeah.
So, like, that is kind of like doing a whole lot of self-talk, self-awareness, but also self-talk through that problem before you confront the other person, whether it be coworker, spouse, friend, whatever, like talking yourself through this. And it's important to be aware, right? Reframe how you're seeing the rejection, because it may not be. And that's another benefit of having a coach, because a coach can be like, okay, well, is it really like that? Or let's look for that evidence that is or isn't true.
Mm.
And the last thing is learning your own emotional regulation, learning the tips, the deep breaths, like crossing your arms and patting, journaling, exercise, sleep can be beneficial. Sometimes even eating, depending on, where you're at. I'm not talking about emotional eating. I'm talking about, I haven't eaten in several hours. And so that affects my blood sugar, and my blood sugar can affect my emotions. So
And
being,
what you're eating. I'm a
yeah,
big proponent of that. What you're eating makes all of the difference. So if you're eating sugar all day long, well, that's going to cause you to
Mhm.
have different behaviors and
Right.
contribute to certain
Mhm.
things in your life. So, yeah.
So just to kind of reiterate that point, I have a little foster son right now, and when I feed him eggs, sausage, like protein, he is so good and calm and all that. But the other morning, it was, they were out of school, Christmas holidays. He was like, "Can I have some pancakes?" So I gave him some pancakes with real maple syrup. So it wasn't, whatever. It wasn't the high fructose corn syrup, but I gave him real syrup. But it was a completely different kid. He was hyper and, doing all this. And I was like, yeah, we won't be doing that again. We
Yeah.
will not be doing pancakes in the morning again. So it does make a difference,
Mhm. Going back to my husband and I were talking the other morning, just kind of having like a relationship check-in. And I think it's important. And what prompted this is we were talking about love languages, and he was like, "Well, your love language is acts of service." And I don't remember what the other one was. And I was like, "That's not my love language." And he's like, "Well, that's what your love language used to be." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it's not what it is now." And so it prompted this discussion of what our love languages are, how we love each other, how we receive love, and then also just being students of each other and getting to really know and understand one another. But as you were talking, I think it's equally important to be a student of yourself and to study yourself and have that self-awareness and sit down and have that awareness of, you know what, sometimes I do have controlling behaviors, and let me understand why. Sometimes I am overly anxious, but let me understand why. And I think a lot of times people just either avoid that altogether because they don't want to. It makes them feel, and I think we talked about this on a previous podcast, it makes them feel like, well, if I'm these things, then that makes me bad, or that makes me wrong, or, I want to be right. But it's actually, when you get to know yourself, you have self-awareness, you have that emotional intelligence. I think it's actually a really attractive that you can be self-aware enough to say and to admit your faults, or to admit that, when I go to my husband and I say, I was really controlling when I just said that, and I didn't mean to come across that way. I'm working on it. It's not about you, it's about me. Like, even just being able to admit things like that, that's attractive.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that because that is so true. If a person, like, if I do something that hurts my spouse, yes, I want to do my best to not behave that way. I want to try to be preventative of that. But if that does come out in me, what do you want to do? You want to go and repair it. You know what? I was wrong. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have assumed that or whatever. And I'm so sorry for doing that. And that, man, people just don't want to say, I'm sorry anymore.
Mhm,
They
mhm.
don't want to take accountability. And I'm telling you, like, in those core things that we talked about, the core things that I need in a relationship, accountability is definitely on that list for me personally. Maybe not everybody, but for me personally, it's like, if you're not willing to take accountability for your actions, even when you know you're wrong, even when there's evidence of wrongdoing, man, I don't know if that I can open up my life to somebody that's not willing to do that. But most people, I mean, if they're good people, they do want to hold themselves accountable. It's hard because our pride gets in the way, but I
Mhm.
want to be surrounded by those people that are, yeah, I should have done that better, or I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have assumed that, or whatever. Those are the kind of people that I want in our life. And if you're going to be in relationship with people, regardless of that, you want to have people that are accountable for their actions. It makes that relationship go a lot better.
Yeah,
Doesn't make it perfect, but it makes it go a lot better.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, Melody, I think this has been another great conversation. I feel like, based off of what we just talked about, maybe we'll have to do a podcast on pride and what pride does to a relationship, what pride
Mhm.
does as a parent, as, a sibling, in a marriage, in the workplace. I think
Right.
that would be a good topic to cover.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you for listening to the Emerge Stronger podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. You can find our podcast on Apple and Spotify, or you can watch the podcast on YouTube by typing in Emerge Stronger Podcast in the search. To book coaching or for additional resources, please visit our website at itsnotover.net.